I would have fallen if it weren't for his arms. It happened in a split second. I was standing on a stool, reaching for a box of summer blankets when my foot slipped. I didn't even have time to be scared. I just felt someone catch me around the waist. Quick, but gentle. We froze. Completely still. His face was inches from mine. I could hear our breathing, tangled and too close. It wasn't my husband. Panic surged through me. Not from the fall, but from the way my body reacted to his touch. My pulse quickened, warmth flooded my chest, and everything around us faded into the sound of the waves outside the window. We stepped back almost at the same time, but it was already too late. Something had shifted. I walked straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and splashed cold water on my face like I could wash the moment off. My hands were shaking. I didn't understand why. Or maybe I did. I just didn't want to admit it. He was my husband's son. The only thing that should exist between us is polite, distant coexistence. Nothing more. He was home for summer break, like every year. My husband had gone on a business trip, leaving us alone in the beach house. It wasn't the first time. But this time, everything felt different. After the shower, I tried to go through the motions. I turned on some jazz, wiped the shelves, aired out the bedrooms. I didn't go near his room. I couldn't bring myself to. I didn't want to remember how he looked in that moment. Sleepy, disoriented, but calm. How he held me like he was afraid I might break. Later in the day, I went for a run. Usually it clears my head. I jog along the shoreline, watch the waves and seagulls, breathe deeply. Movement helps push thoughts away. But this time, nothing worked. My mind kept circling back. To that morning, to that look, to that pause. What unsettled me the most? The situation itself? His hands, or the way I responded? I didn't pull away. In fact, for a second I felt seen. And maybe that's where the danger began. It had been a long time since I felt noticed. Genuinely noticed. When I'm tired, quiet, laughing. Someone who sees all of that. My husband works a lot, and I've always supported him. He's often away, and I've learned to live with that silence. But loneliness is tricky. It makes you vulnerable. Soft in places you used to protect. When I got home, he was already in the kitchen, cutting fruit, setting out mugs. I walked past him like nothing had happened. No words, no eye contact. But I felt everything. Every movement, every breath. I sat outside with a book, pretending to read, trying to convince myself it was just a moment, nothing more. But my body wouldn't let it go. That day marked something for me, not because something actually happened, but because I saw a crack. Inside myself, in my marriage, in the boundaries I thought were solid. I always believed I was someone who kept a safe distance. But apparently all it took was one touch. I spent the evening staring at the ocean. The sun dropped slowly, painting the sky in soft pinks. Somewhere inside the house, he moved behind closed doors, and I hated myself for listening to his footsteps, for noticing. That night, I didn't sleep. Everything was too loud. My thoughts, my heart, the past. I kept thinking about how easy it is to cross a line, not out of desire, but out of years of silence, out of needing something that used to be there and somehow vanished. Something I didn't even know I missed. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew one thing. After that day, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I tried to pretend everything was normal. Same cup of coffee, same morning rituals, jazz playing softly in the background. Everything was routine, except nothing felt right. My body moved automatically, but my mind felt detached, like it was observing me from the outside. I cleaned with unusual intensity, as if I could scrub away not just the dust, but my own feelings. Yet everything reminded me. His glass on the kitchen counter, a towel tossed casually over a chair, the faint trace of his cologne mixing with the ocean air. I felt like a stranger in my own home. He didn't cross my path much, but that only made the tension sharper. I found myself listening for sounds. His footsteps, a door closing, the water running in the shower. Every sound confirmed he was here, and that here didn't feel the same anymore. Sometimes our paths would still cross. He'd pass me in the hallway, I'd walk toward the garden. I'd pretend to be focused on something. My phone, the dishes, anything to look busy. He didn't seek me out either, but I could tell. He noticed everything. At lunch, I made something simple that everyone liked. Pasta with sauce, a salad. I barely ate. I just stared into my plate while he sat across from me in silence. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else. It felt full. Full of what we couldn't say. I kept telling myself it would pass. That time would fix it. Everything could be endured if you didn't give in to impulse. But later that evening, I caught myself waiting for the sound of his door opening, for a glimpse of him walking through the house. I hated it, but I still waited. It felt like I was at war with myself. Between the version of me that was stable, grounded, sensible, and something newer, rawer, that had surfaced without warning. A woman who was tired of being invisible, of being alone in a life that looked full on the outside. I remembered conversations with friends where we proudly said, "We know how to control ourselves, even when things get tough." But now I saw how unprepared we all were for the quiet kind of temptation. The kind that doesn't come with declarations or fireworks, but with silence, with presence. That evening, I stepped outside just to breathe. The air was cool, the sky open. The ocean moved steadily in the distance. I sat on the bench near the fence and just listened. I closed my eyes and the silence felt so thick it almost had weight. Then I heard his footsteps. He stepped out onto the porch but didn't come closer. And in that moment, I realized he felt it too. The line. And he was afraid to cross it again. We just existed in the same space, not looking at each other, not speaking, but still aware of everything. Back inside, I turned off the lights and lay in bed, staring into the dark. I thought about the line, where it actually begins. At what point does discomfort turn into danger? When does I feel lonely become, I wish he were here? I didn't want to feel this. I never asked for it. But it was here anyway. Relentless, heavy, like the ocean moisture that hangs in the air at night. Sticky, salty, unwelcome. Before falling asleep, a thought came to me. Maybe I was imagining it all. Maybe I was projecting things that weren't there. Maybe this wasn't energy or silence or connection. Maybe it was just boredom, coincidence, lack of attention. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the heart is stubborn. It notices what the mind tries to ignore. And that's the part that scared me most. I opened the door to his room because the air conditioner had started making noise again. It did that often. Old, just like everything else in this house. I didn't knock. Not because I wanted to walk in unannounced, but because I simply didn't think. I was sure he wasn't there. He was. He stood by the closet, shirtless, reaching up to grab a box from the top shelf. When he heard the door creak, he turned. We both froze. I didn't know what to do. He moved first, facing me, squinting slightly against the light from the hallway. I stepped back instinctively, like I'd intruded on something private. The unmade bed, a book open on the desk, and him, grown, calm, silent. I muttered something to justify why I was there and stepped back. He walked over, took the screwdriver from my hand, the one I'd brought without thinking, and set it on the table. His hand touched mine. And in that moment, everything we'd been avoiding was suddenly real. Nothing actually happened. Not in theory. No abrupt moves, no words. Just a feeling. The space between us was too small, too heavy. I stood there, breathing, and realized that this was it. The moment. Either now or never. He took a step forward, hesitant as if waiting for me to stop him. But I didn't. I felt something inside me break. My role, my restraint, my sense of logic. The kiss happened quietly. Not like in the movies. Not like a confession, more like a slip, like a defense mechanism failing. His lips touched mine, soft, cautious. No pressure, no demand, just a truth. He kissed me, and I didn't stop it. The world outside disappeared. I didn't hear the waves, didn't feel the air, only the kiss, like a moment of undeniable clarity, a silence that couldn't be ignored. He pulled back first. I stood there, still, eyes lowered. I wanted to say it was a mistake, that we'd crossed a line, that it had to be forgotten. But I didn't say anything, because inside there was no regret, just quiet and a tremble. That evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, a cup of cold tea in my hands, my mind blank. No accusations, no excuses, just a strange calm, like the kind that follows a revelation. I knew it was wrong. I knew it had to stay in the past, but I couldn't erase how it felt. I couldn't forget the warmth of his hand. I tried to understand. Why did I let it happen? It wasn't who I was. It went against everything I believed in. But maybe it wasn't about character. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Exhaustion from being strong when no one holds you. From being good in a life that leaves you feeling invisible. I looked at the horizon again. The sun slipped behind the water, and with it, my sense of control. I couldn't pretend anymore. Not even to myself. That night, I left the window open. The breeze moved the curtains and cooled the room. But I still felt warm. Not from the air, but from shame. From memory. From the fact that I didn't say no. And him. He didn't appear. He didn't leave his room. Didn't pass by. Not a single sound. And that scared me more than the kiss itself. Because now it wasn't, maybe something's there. Now it was real. It had happened. A line had been crossed. And there was no way back. The morning started with pretending. I got up early, as if the day itself could erase what happened the night before. I made coffee, checked my emails, turned on music. I acted like nothing had changed. And yet, every movement felt tight, like a string pulled too hard. He came into the kitchen too, silent, calm. Made his breakfast like always, but the air between us was different. We didn't look at each other, didn't cross paths, didn't say a single unnecessary word. Still, the silence was deafening. I went out into the garden. I swept fallen leaves, wiped down the little table under the tree, watered the flowers. My hands were busy, but my thoughts weren't. They kept looping through everything. His step toward me, that look, the touch, and my kiss in return. I didn't know what I expected now. For him to say something, do something, or disappear into his room like nothing ever happened. But the worst part was that deep down, I didn't want him to forget. I wanted him to feel it too. Inside me, two sides were fighting. One, mature, rational, demanding that I stop this madness. The other, something that had come alive, something that had been quiet for too long. And now it was awake. We spent the day near each other, but as if in different worlds. I washed the floors, he read on the porch. I cooked dinner. He silently placed the plates on the table. Everything looked normal, almost perfect. But beneath that surface, something stirred between us, something neither of us dared touch. I told myself it wouldn't happen again, that it was a mistake. But my body didn't agree. I sensed his presence even through walls. I noticed his breathing, his footsteps, his gestures, and the more I tried to forget, the more I felt it. That evening, I stayed on the terrace alone. The breeze moved the curtains. The sun sank lower. In my mind, there was a strange stillness and clarity. It had happened. Not by chance. Not by accident. But because something had begun between us. And now it lived here, too. At one point, I closed my eyes and asked myself the real question. Why? Why didn't I stop it? Why did I let it happen at all? The answer was simple and painful. I felt seen. Not out of duty or responsibility, not as someone who keeps a house running, but as a woman, as a person who could still be noticed, still evoke something in someone else. This wasn't romance. It wasn't passion. It was loneliness that had been buried under years of routine. It was silence finally breaking through. I wasn't proud of myself, but I didn't hate myself either. I wasn't judging. I just understood. No matter what happens next, I wouldn't go back to being who I was before. That night, I went to bed early but couldn't sleep. I heard him walking down the hallway, heard him pause at my door. He didn't come in, and that was the right thing. But my chest tightened anyway. I knew we'd reached the edge. And now every step was a decision. Either step back or step into the unknown. But staying still? That was no longer an option. He came back unexpectedly. My husband, a full day early. I heard the sound of the car pulling into the driveway like a thunderclap on a clear day. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. I was standing at the kitchen counter and he was beside me, cutting vegetables for dinner. The space between us was small, but neither of us said a word. Everything seemed under control, until the front door opened. He came in cheerful, road-weary, started talking right away, like nothing had changed. And for him, nothing had. But for us, everything had. A chill ran down my spine. My hands trembled slightly as I held the knife and spoon, but I acted like everything was fine. We exchanged glances, brief, tense. He immediately took a step back as if realizing something. But my husband, of course, noticed nothing. The evening passed in its usual rhythm. Dinner talk, laughter, plans for the weekend. My husband shared stories from his trip, showed photos on his phone. I nodded, smiled. But every time I caught a glimpse of him, I saw he couldn't relax. His shoulders were too stiff, his gaze too focused. I felt split in two. One part, the wife, attentive, supportive, grateful he was back. The other, a participant in something unnamed, something that could never happen again, but also something that couldn't be erased. Later, when my husband went to take a shower, I stayed in the kitchen alone. My hands scrubbed the dishes automatically, but my mind was stuck on one thought. This should have never gone that far. It had been a moment, a weakness, an impulse. But now it was real. He came in quietly. I felt him there before I even turned around. He grabbed a towel, didn't say anything, and stepped outside. I didn't need to see his face to know. He was just as shaken as I was. My husband went to bed early. I stayed up in the living room, staring out the window. The room was dim, just a single lamp above the armchair casting a warm glow. Beyond the glass, the ocean looked calm, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything was storming. Every word my husband said felt like a quiet accusation, even though he suspected nothing. My thoughts were loud, heavy. I had become afraid of something simple, being alone with him. Not out of fear, but because of a feeling that refused to leave. That day changed things again. If before everything felt uncertain, now it felt at risk. I had crossed that thin line between what's right and what should never happen. Even if no one saw it. Even if only we knew. But knowing, that's enough. It lives inside you, moves with you, and it corrodes you from within. Quietly, not like an explosion, but just as powerfully. That night I lay down next to my husband. He slept soundly. I stared at the ceiling and thought, how many stories like this happen every day? Where people lose their direction not out of malice, but from emptiness, from a lack of warmth, from too much silence. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I wouldn't be the same again. I knew it would happen, not the exact moment or the way it would unfold, but deep down, I felt it coming, the shift. And it did. My husband left that evening to meet friends, watch a game at a bar. I stayed home. The house was quiet, like it always was during his trips. But this time, the silence didn't comfort me. It reminded me. I walked around the house, checking the stove, the windows, the lights. I tried to fill the space with routine. But inside, something was rising, tightening around my throat. I was tired of being afraid of my own feelings. And more than that, afraid of myself. He was standing on the porch. I saw him through the glass door, wearing a jacket, holding his keys. He turned like he was about to leave. But he didn't. I opened the door. Just to open it. To pass by, maybe say something casual. But I stayed. We stood there in the dim light, barely breathing, saying nothing. We both knew that words would only destroy whatever fragile balance remained. He stepped closer. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I didn't step back. I didn't need to look into his eyes to know. He felt the same. And he couldn't keep pretending otherwise. He leaned in, slowly, like asking without speaking. And I answered in silence, too. Not with resistance. The second kiss was different. It wasn't accidental. It didn't happen by chance. It was a decision. A joint one. No words, no excuses. It was quieter, slower, longer, but just as painful. Because this time there was no uncertainty, only the truth. We had crossed the line completely. I felt something inside me give way. My inner walls, the ones I'd built over years, started to crumble. Not because I wanted them to, but because holding them up had become impossible. When we pulled away, I didn't feel relief, just silence. An understanding that this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. We hadn't stumbled. We had stepped forward. I went to my room without saying a word, closed the door, sat down on the floor by the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't think. I just sat there with the understanding that I was no longer the kind of wife someone would admire. I was a person who had made a decision. And now I had to face what that meant. I didn't sleep. I just listened to the ocean outside. Steady, endless, unchanged. It never changes, always the same. But I wasn't the same anymore. At dawn, I stood in front of the mirror. Tired, pale, quiet. I didn't see myself in the reflection. I saw someone else. Someone who had grown tired of being just a background presence in her own life. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't planned it. But I hadn't stopped it either. And that was the truth I now had to carry. I woke up before sunrise. No alarm. Just a feeling inside me. This couldn't go on. I got up, walked past the mirror without looking. Not because I didn't want to, but because I already knew what I'd see. I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of cold tea left from the night before. It was bitter. Honestly bitter. Just like everything I'd been feeling these past days. Paper. Pen. Not to write to anyone. Just for me. To finally say things as they were. I wrote briefly. You crossed a line you had no right to. Now either stop, or everything holding you together will collapse. It wasn't a confession. It was a diagnosis. All day I avoided his eyes. I made sure to disappear before he entered a room. I closed doors before I heard his footsteps. I tried to return to the version of myself that existed before. Composed, quiet, correct. But inside everything still hummed. He felt it too. And he began avoiding me in return. Not a single shared space all day. Just footsteps in the distance. Just a shadow behind the glass. I removed the throw blanket from the couch, the one he'd brought that evening. I rearranged the cups, switching out the ones we'd used the day of the kiss. It felt symbolic, maybe even silly. But I needed it. I was scrubbing away the traces. Not out of hate. Out of fear. That evening, my husband brought wine. He said he missed me. Said we barely spent time together anymore. I nodded, agreed, but my body tensed with the effort to act natural. He laughed, shared stories about work, about colleagues. I smiled, and I knew, if I didn't make a decision now, everything would start to crack. Not suddenly, but gradually, quietly, every day. Late at night, I sat alone again. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the small lamp above the stove. I held that same piece of paper, read the words I had written that morning, and I understood. I didn't want to keep living in this in-between space. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose not to let it happen again. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because I didn't want to lose myself completely. I walked to the window. The ocean was calm, smooth, almost lifeless. I thought, maybe I used to feel that calm. Still, steady. And now, everything had shifted. This wasn't an ending, not a dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet, internal enough. Sometimes saying no isn't weakness. It's a choice. And maybe the only way left to protect whatever is still real. He said he was leaving. I heard it during dinner, the three of us sitting together. My husband asked a casual question about plans, and he answered. He'd been offered an internship in another city, a real company, a serious opportunity. He was leaving in 2 days. My husband was thrilled. He patted him on the shoulder, started saying how proud he was. I sat nearby, offered a polite smile, nodded. Everything happening around me felt distant. I looked at him and couldn't decide if what I felt was relief or something closer to loss. The night passed in silence. No footsteps, no movement. He didn't come near me, and I didn't seek him out. It was understood. Our decision had been made. The next day, the house moved at its usual rhythm. My husband went out on errands. I cleaned, folded laundry, sorted drawers. He packed. I could hear zippers, closet doors closing. No words, just the quiet sound of leaving. Toward evening, he stepped outside, stood in the sunlight, looking toward the ocean. I followed, pretending I was just watering the plants. We stood a few feet apart, not facing each other. We both understood. This was a goodbye. Not the spoken kind, the silent kind. I remembered when he first came to this house. Quiet, reserved. I had tried to just be a warm background, someone he could coexist with. And now we stood here with dozens of unsaid emotions between us. He stepped closer. I didn't move away. But I didn't move toward him either. We just stood there, in silence. I could feel his gaze, but I didn't lift my eyes. If I looked, I might change my mind. And I no longer had that right. He wanted to say something. I saw it in his breath, the way his lips moved slightly. But he stopped himself. We both knew. Everything that could be felt had already been felt. Saying anything now would be too late. He turned and walked back inside. I stayed in the garden, gripping the watering can as if my balance depended on it. Later, he said goodbye to my husband. Suitcase in hand, jacket over his arm, navigation open on his phone. My husband gave him advice, hugged him tightly. I stood nearby, watching. Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Just before he stepped outside, he looked at me. Not into my eyes. At my face. Like he was trying to memorize it. I nodded, lightly, almost invisibly. That was the only gesture I allowed myself. He left, didn't look back. And that was right. I stayed on the porch. My husband called me inside, but I said I'd come in later. I just sat there. The wind tugged at the edge of the blanket. The air was dry, clear. Inside, I felt empty. Not from grief, not from regret, from completion. Like something had closed. A cycle. Quietly, without shouting, without a final scene. I no longer waited for footsteps behind the door, no longer feared glances. Everything had become simple again, but not the same. A week passed. The house returned to normal. Stable. Predictable. My husband shared stories, brought home flowers, asked how my day had gone. Everything was back in place. Except me. I'd learned to behave the same way I used to. Make breakfast, open the windows, smile at the right times. But I was watching myself from the outside, like an actress performing a role she knew by heart. He didn't call, didn't write. And I didn't expect him to. There were no promises between us, no loose ends, only memory. But that was enough. It lingered in gestures, in silence, in how I moved through space. I didn't regret. I didn't romanticize it. But I didn't forget. Because you don't forget something that changes you. Not on the surface, but in the core. Sometimes I would step onto the porch and look out toward the road. Not because I hoped to see him, but to make sure I wasn't hoping anymore. And then slowly came a strange peace. Not joy, not relief, just quiet. As if everything that needed to happen had, and everything that needed to be felt had been. I realized I had no right to guilt if I'd chosen the ending, and no right to ache if I'd chosen the stillness. I had done what I could. The rest was out of my hands. One morning, I sat at the edge of the bed while my husband slept. I thought it would be a moment of weakness, but it was a moment of strength. I hadn't run. I hadn't broken. I hadn't betrayed. I stood still. Maybe cracked, but still whole. Later, as I watered the garden, a neighbor passed by and said I looked peaceful. I nodded. Not because it was true, but because I had chosen to be. That evening, we sat on the porch again. My husband talked about projects at work. I nodded, listened. And suddenly I understood. I was still here. And that too was a choice. Not as a victim, but as someone who knows they could leave, and still stayed. I no longer looked for moments that made me feel alive. I knew I was living, because I had done something important. I had seen myself clearly. And I didn't look away. When the sun dipped behind the horizon, I stayed wrapped in a blanket and thought, this story wouldn't end with a crash. Or drama. And that was good. Because not everything in life should end with noise. Some things end with quiet. Honest. Steady. Fearless.